Welcome to Maurer Glass Podcast, where we view the world through the lens of design. I'm your host, Jill Maurer, and I'm here with Artimus. Well, there was a lot going on since we have last podcasted. First thing that comes to mind for me is the World Cup and how crazy Americans are going about this. You know, I've had au pairs for a long time when the boys were growing up, and so I knew a little bit about the World Cup because every 4 years or so they were all excited about it, and we just thought it was cute, and we found a bar where they could go find where to watch it. But now Americans are very interested in it.
There are 3 World Cups back. So there was one in South Africa in 2010. That's when I would say we had a significant amount of interest, and I actually think that a lot of it has to do with the games that have been made for it. Like FIFA is one of the biggest games made for Xbox, PlayStation.
Oh, interesting.
And it has gotten so many people into soccer. I mean, I have a lot of friends who never really cared about soccer, but because the game is so fun, it's almost like flashcards. Like it taught you who the players were, who the best players were, and so they watch it knowing, oh, I know that team. I play with them whenever I play with this country, etc.
Interesting. So when my boys were little, my son played some soccer, but you know, he was sort of the big burly kid. He wasn't the best at it, and he ended up playing American football. But there was this trend where it was much more difficult to find players for American football because a lot of them, the parents wouldn't let their children play. And there are some inherent dangers to American football. There are to soccer too. I mean, I've seen some horrible injuries, but I do think maybe it's a culmination of a lot of things. When I was a child, we didn't really play soccer, maybe once a year, in phys ed. So you have children growing up playing soccer. Then you have what you're talking about, the games that introduced more. And then the other thing that I think has led to it too is our being able to watch whatever we want, wherever in the world it is. So on YouTube or whatever, because, you know, when I was growing up, other than Pele, I couldn't name a single soccer player, and there just wasn't a lot on TV. And Pele really transcended the soccer world, and so we would see him on television sometimes. My father never watched soccer, but he would watch Pele. But that was it. Other than that, you just didn't even see it. Now we're exposed to more things, and I do think that, in a lot of ways we're more of a global community, and I think we're just more aware that there's a world there beyond our borders and that not everybody cares about the World Series.
Yeah, and the one thing we care about a lot in America especially is, we love entertainment. We do a lot of entertainment. So if you can frame anything into sort of a narrative or give it a lore or make it seem like, well, we're on board for pretty much anything.
Yeah, and if we think we're crazy fans, we ain't got nothing on these soccer people.
Oh, yeah. The Mexico played Germany in this first group stage, and surprisingly, well, some people weren't surprised, but I personally was surprised because Germany, they're the reigning champions, and Mexico is a very good team, but Germany is, this is the team right here. They scored on Germany, and when they scored on them, apparently the earthquake back in Mexico from everyone simultaneously like jumping and cheering was so big that it caused what they call an artificial seismic event. Not one that you could feel, but it was the people registering the earth were just like,
something just happened.
This must be, I'm assuming Mexico scored because Mexico City is a rough place to be right now.
That's kind of great. There was, I don't remember, there was back in the day, there was something about, there was a problem in some city because there was a very popular TV show, and during the commercials everybody was flushing the toilets at the same time, which was stressing the whole plumbing
system. That happens
system.
with the Super Bowl a lot.
Does it?
Yeah, it happens in the first 5 minutes of halftime. And I mean, the power grid, the electric companies even have to boost power for certain things. Like when they know everyone's TV is going to be turned on, like they adjust knowing how fans are going to react. People underestimate that. I remember I was at the Rally to Restore Sanity, which was an event that Jon Stewart hosted with Colbert, I want to say back in 2000. I think it might have been about 2010, 2011. He did it on the in the National Mall, like on the front lawn of Congress, and they were expecting about 50,000 people. They got almost 250,000 people there. And the Mythbusters came out, and they said, we're going to do an experiment since there's so many people you out there. On the big screens, there's a big countdown. When it goes 3, 2, 1, 0, we want you all to jump up in the air at the same time, and we're going to actually measure the seismic level of it. Now, being the jerk that I sort of am, I was like, I'm not jumping. I want to feel it. So I stood still, and everyone jumped up in the air and landed. And I'm not kidding. When they landed, the ground went a good like 6 inches below my feet, and it caused like basically a micro earthquake when they measured it. It's crazy how much, if you have that many people simultaneously doing something, it can cause one of those.
That's amazing. You know, I went to high school in Alaska, and we have lots of earthquakes every day. There was an earthquake there, and we know exactly where the fault line is and all of that. And our buildings are designed to handle an earthquake, and what that means is that they're flexible. So we knew as a group that we could get a building rocking. You could do that. You can all work together, and it doesn't take that much, and you just sort of move and you can get it rocking. You go back and forth and everybody does it. But it never occurred to me that you could affect the actual earth beneath your feet.
Yeah, because we think the Earth is, it's really big, but it's really a molten ball of just a bunch of plates on the surface.
Yeah, but we're tiny little insignificant beings compared. It's amazing
That's
that
true.
you can do it.
Yeah, speaking of Mexico, so I think I was mentioning to you the part that blew my mind a little bit is we were watching the Mexico game, and I was talking to my roommate, and we were like, yeah, you could tell that's a Mexican uniform. Like, you can tell that's Mexico. Mm-hmm. It's got green jersey, white shorts, and red socks. And then we looked at each other. We were like, wait a second. So we
could maybe get it confused with Italy or something.
Yeah.
But you get it.
You somehow get that it's their jersey. We're like, if you put that jersey, like, if you just had that laid out on your bed, you say that's Mexico right there without any sort of flag. And we were talking about that, and we looked it up, and obviously the Mexican flag, if you think about it, it's green, then white, then red, and they're all equal proportions. So why is it that when they have a green primary color, like the shirt is the biggest part of the color, why is it that we know that's Mexico? So then we started thinking about ours and how USA, I mean, typically, we do white too, but typically we either do blue or white as our primary, and we use red as the accent. Like, we're very, I don't know what the word is, conservative with our red. We're redophobic.
I wonder if that has to do with the redcoats. Because our colors came from the British flag. Maybe I don't know. I'm winging it here, but maybe we took the colors for the flag, but then when we saw the redcoats, we were like, okay, but let's not emphasize the red.
Yeah, and we buy that. George Washington, he used to make his own uniforms, and he liked the color blue, and a lot of the colonial people, they used blue, and it was sort of our official color, but blue is an expensive dye back then to use.
Well, but they were in the U.S. where we have indigo, and so maybe that's part of the reason that we liked it is because it wasn't as expensive for us.
As maybe red might have been. You don't want to confuse us. So normally they'd be wearing whatever they had, but if they wore something, it would be blue. So maybe that's what it is we always just sort of use blue as like that's our colonial look, but
I don't know.
Because if you look at the flag, and then we looked up the actual law, and it's something like, U.S. law 10,346, but it actually outlines the actual dimensions of the flag. And someone online did all the calculations because you have to take like stars and negative space and like how much that takes up. But they figured that blue only makes up about 18% of the flag. So considering that's our primary color for most of our national designs, it's interesting that's
I wonder what percentage blue made up in the beginning when we only had 13 stars. There's a big difference between 13 and 50.
Yeah, you'd imagine it's less because it's fewer stars, but
But still, it's not going to necessarily be as much of the red and white. That is interesting. I was looking at some of the soccer. Okay, I'm just going to say soccer. We did a video where I got flagged every time I said soccer. I know if you're out there and you're not
American. It was all in fun. I mean, the funny thing is the announcers, we noticed the announcers are starting, and some of them are for the American broadcast, but a lot of them say soccer just as much as they say football.
Okay.
Some of them are saying uniforms and kits. Like, there's sort of, it's interesting that, I don't know if it's American influence, but that section of fandom is actually starting to influence our announcers or people that are commissioned by us to announce, so it might start creeping its way.
And goal, right? What do they call it?
Goal?
Goal and, okay.
You mean like they had a goalie and then they had a keeper, but the announcers call it a goalie still. They'll call it a goalie.
Yeah, a keeper, that's Quidditch. I've never... Really? They call it a keeper?
It can be called a keeper, yeah.
Interesting.
It's a goalkeeper.
That would be, as most of you know, we also do YouTube videos. That might be an interesting YouTube video just to look at some of the
words and stuff like that.
Well, some of the uniforms. Because I have to tell you, I'm underwhelmed with a lot of the uniforms. Some of the uniforms are cool, or the kits, or whatever you call them. And some of them I couldn't, they look like my son's high school football practice uniform. Like nobody would go to a game in that. And I understand that as Americans, we're kind of loud and proud and we come in flamboyant and it's all about, the show is as much as, as the whole thing. But what is it about these soccer people? Is it that they just have no style? They have no flair? Is it that part of the culture is to be understated? Like, I'm genuinely asking. I mean, I just don't see the teams.
I'm sure it varies country to country. We were talking about Brazil and how they've got more championships than anybody else, and they have sort of used their same uniform forever. And I'm sure it has a lot to do with what is the word? It's sort of like luck, superstition. Like you don't want to change what you've been doing
because they win so much.
Yeah, or it's just part of their.
But I'm telling you, I look at the Brazil uniform and I think, okay, wait a minute, is that Sweden? It's similar colors, and they're not. I don't know. And Brazil. I mean, when you think about Rio and you think about all the grand.
When they hosted the World Cup in 2014, the ball that they had designed for them had every color under the sun. It had green and orange, and it was blue and pink. It was a very flamboyant ball.
Well, Rio, the carnival, is held in Rio. And Rio, I mean, people in Brazil are stylish, and that they're gorgeous, they're stylish, they know how to use color, they're out there, and then you just see the uniform, you go, okay.
That's an interesting task for somebody. There's this architecture book where this famous architect who I can't name because I try to read a lot about different things that I don't really know that much about, but it's hard though because sometimes I want to store stuff, but I don't have the memory to store everything, so I try to store the bigger picture. But generally, what this guy was talking about, and he was apparently a huge advocate for using architecture to cement cultural meaning and better mankind, but also sealing not just the time, but what you hope culture to become. So he was talking about architecture just not being like, oh, this place looks cool. It actually has to do something. So it'd be interesting to talk to different designers of national team uniforms, like who work for Adidas, etc. Of like, what is your purpose when you design this country's uniform?
Well, and is it somebody from that country designing it, or is it American? Again, with architecture in Rio, Rio has there's some just beautiful shots of Rio where that you really juxtapose the old and the new. The beautiful old architecture and the beautiful new architecture, and they don't. Neither one apologizes. They're both there. They're proud, and they are right next to each other. And I do think that that's the way it should be. With architecture too, I think part of what you're getting at is it's not just how beautiful the building looks, but it's the functionality of the building, how it fits into everything around it, and how the whole city works, how it all works together and how it all lives together. And gosh, we could do a whole podcast on that. All that. We can meander here when we're talking about design, can't we? Let's see, what else happened? This was interesting because my son does play video games, and I don't think he's addicted, but sometimes I wonder, and I've had this conversation with him that, I really want you to understand. Because he's an adult now and he makes his decisions. But I told him, I want you to understand that these games are designed to get you hooked on them. You are being played. You think you're playing, but you're being played. So they're designed. I've spoken before with a coder who talks about how they very clearly have studied the brain and how it gets addicted and how it gets hooked, and the whole thing with levels and different little rewards. It really hooks you. And I've kind of seen that in my son. And again, I don't think it's over the top, but enough to make me a little worried. And the World Health Organization has just come out with a new report. They're calling video games, they're classifying them as a mental health issue. It's the mental health and addiction section of the World Health Organization is identifying this as a disease or as a problem. And I think that there's still a lot of controversy around it, and I think that there are a lot of debates over it, but I'm seeing it. I can actually see it, and I think that it might be intentional in the same way that the opioid addiction catastrophe that we're dealing with in the US was intentional. People knew it would happen. They wanted it to happen. They designed it to happen. They exploited the way the human body works in order to make money, and this is really concerning me. I mean, I love design, but like anything else, design can be used for bad or good, and it has me nervous.
I'm dying.
Don't worry, I know an editor who can edit that out.
Good. Smart guy, I'm sure. Yeah, that's interesting. I have I don't know, I do see, I think the only danger is that it looks like the main fear of everyone is overgeneralizing, because there are video game addicts, and there's a lot of them, but not all video games are created equally. So, for example, the games you're describing, the ones that are designed to keep you hooked, that falls in this newer category of like free to play, where like they have made it so that you can't stop playing. But there are other kinds of games that aren't necessarily designed that way, and in a lot of ways they're just like movies. One of my favorite examples is the Assassin's Creed one. Essentially what it does is it's this internal lore that takes different time periods. Like they'll do Rome, they'll do Egypt, they'll do this, and it tries to tie them together with this obviously fictional story about Templars and Illuminati, etc., that kind of stuff. But it only comes out every couple of years, and when
Did
it
you
does...
just call the Illuminati fictional?
I did. They don't. They use the word Templar, and the Templars were real, but their version of the Templars it's sort of a take on that, where the general idea of it is that there is this group of people who throughout time has tried to basically enslave us, and there's been this secret society known as the Assassins who are trying to keep them in check, and they're waging this...
Are they related to the lizard people?
I'm sure that lore's coming somewhere. Some new game, Assassin's Creed lizard lore. That's the general basis of it. But it's a very beautiful game, because it's essentially a 7-hour movie that you have to play certain parts to get the next cutscene. To the point where some of the newer ones, I honestly just watched all the cutscenes as this long 7-hour movie, because it's such a well written, the dialogue's great, and it's mocap, which is one of my personal favorite forms of filmmaking, where it's real actors that have the things on them, and as they act, they digitally change them into a character and put them in a setting. Mm-hmm. So by all accounts, it is filmmaking. And in film studies, you learn that over the years, video games and films have become closer. It used to be, okay, you're a frog jumping across a traffic lane, you need to get across there. That's all the backstory you get. Movies are being inspired now by video games, and video games are taking a more cinematic approach. So they're sort of merging, and a couple of filmmakers have said that one day they are going to be just about the same.
Okay, so for my fellow Star Trek fans, we know this. It's the holodeck. He's not a Trekkie. We just need to give him a little space here to catch up.
No, not a Trekkie. I was a Star Wars kid. No Star Trek for me.
So when you say you were a Star Wars kid, what is the first Star Wars movie you saw?
I did see the original. So I did
Really?
see 4, 5, 6. Yeah, I had like one of the VHS box sets of 4, 5, 6, then 1, 2, 3, and then the newer ones. So I did watch it in the correct order, I'll tell you that much. But not only that, I also read a lot of the books that go in between, and the comic books and the extra lore that goes out there. Like the amount of stuff that happens in between episode 3 and episode 4 in terms of like Darth Vader and Obi-Wan, like all the stuff that happens outside, and they've got all these shows now that show, like, it's a huge universe.
Okay, my world has just shifted. So you are officially a geek. I feel like saying welcome. His eyes are rolling.
I don't
he's
recognize.
struggling.
See, that's the thing.
But he's a geek. Not all
I don't
geeks
recognize
are...
the word geek, because geek implies that it's some. And back in the day, it wasn't. You had the guy with the pencil holder in his pocket. You shoved him in a locker, etc. But nowadays, it's not. It's almost not cool to not have something you're super passionate. It's like something like everybody's a geek now.
Okay, you're welcome. So yeah, I was a geek, I guess, way before it was cool. I was in that cowboy era of starting a software company, and people didn't understand what I was doing. Why wasn't I becoming a lawyer or a doctor? So
yeah, now it's like everyone wants that. Oh, you're the guy that comes out and says, "Look at this new hovercraft."
I know, and being an entrepreneur, nobody understood that. I mean, my ex's parents wanted to just annihilate me because So you're welcome. We've changed the culture.
Well, thank you very much. We appreciate that. No, I'm dead serious. It's everyone's obsessed with something nowadays, especially with all this media now. Like, you can't not be a geek about something these days. It's impossible not to.
Another thing that I read about in the news that is, I'm frankly going to say it's disturbing me, and I try to have an open mind about things, but I do know, just like design can be used for evil or for good. Science can be used for evil or for good, and they're often combined together. So one thing I was reading about was these whole towns that nobody knew about. They each had a couple 100,000 people, and nobody knew about them. And even the people living in them, they knew that they were working on a government project, but they weren't really sure what. They started as these beautiful sort of mid-mod towns, and what they were working on was the atomic bomb. And it wasn't until after Hiroshima that they knew what they were working on, because they each only had to work on a certain piece. And I thought about that because I've also been reading about these babies that are being designed really to have 3 parents. Have you heard about this?
How do they have 3 parents?
So what happens is, now in a typical situation, like say you and I were going to have a baby and I couldn't carry the baby, or for whatever reason, they would harvest my eggs. They'd put your sperm in my eggs, and then I would, and you'd have a fetus that they would implant. If for some reason I didn't have eggs, maybe they'd use another woman's egg, and a sperm, and maybe if there was something wrong with your sperm, they'd use another person's sperm, whatever, and then they'd implant it. So there were, it was a little more natural in air quotes, because it was one man, one woman, and even though you could argue that things were a little odd there, and that maybe you really shouldn't be using the egg of a woman who couldn't have a normal baby. There's an argument for that, because there's the whole natural selection kind of thing. But what this is apparently you can have mitochondrial diseases, or mitochondrial. And all I remember from my high school science was the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. It sort of provides the energy. But here's what they're doing. And they're doing it in multiple countries, even though some have not admitted it. Now, Russia has, they have several babies. England has. It's still not happening in the U.S. U.S. doctors, if they want to do it, are going to Mexico or other places. And here's the situation. So say that I have a problem with my mitochondrial DNA, and I might pass that disease on to a child. Or say I just am having problems having children. And so we're going to have a baby together, but we're having problems. So what they're going to do is they're going to harvest one of my eggs. They're going to take most of the DNA out of my egg. They're going to take your sperm. But because I have a problem with the mitochondrial, and I know I'm not explaining this exactly well because I don't fully understand it, but what they're going to do is they're going to take another woman's egg, and they're going to sort of vacuum it out of all the DNA except for the mitochondrial DNA. So they're just leaving the shell of the egg, and then they're going to put both your DNA and my DNA in that egg, and then implant it in me or in another woman. And so what happens is this baby now has the DNA from 3 different people. From you, me, and whoever donated the egg that is the shell. Now, this is walking over an ethical boundary that the world has sort of collectively set. Because what happens is, if that baby is a boy, it really only has the DNA from 2 people. It only has the DNA from you and me. But if it's a girl, the mitochondrial DNA from that egg, from that third person, is passed on to the girl. And then all of that mess, whatever that is, can be passed on for generations. And the line that we didn't cross before was that we would produce something that could have offspring that had altered DNA. And the truth is, we don't know, we have no way of knowing what kind of problems a person with 3 sets of DNA is going to have. We have no idea what could go wrong there.
I see. So if a person gets plastic surgery, that physical change doesn't really affect their children. It's their decision. This is a decision that not only goes into a person who doesn't get a say in the matter, but every one of their offspring forevermore.
Whatever unknown problem could be going all the way through. And there may be no problem. But so, and there's no world.
It's sort of an endless guinea pig.
Yeah, because we can't even control, as has been in the news recently, we can't control what other people do with the atomic bomb. We can't control what they do with DNA. I mean, I honestly believe, right now it's not legal or the world has said it's not ethical. They're not going to clone humans. I think humans have already been cloned. I think it's naive to think that they haven't. If you can clone a sheep, we are not more complicated than a sheep. You can clone a human, and somebody out there has done it, and it might even be us. I'm not putting us on a. I'm not saying that we're ethically better than anybody else. I mean, So my concern really, like just looking at it through the lens of design, is that we're all afraid that we're going to annihilate the human race because of a war. But my concern is that we are going to actually annihilate our gene pool, that we are just going to destroy ourselves on a microscopic level. And it could be through this DNA problem, it could be through nanotechnology. I don't know, but I think that the enemy we're going to fight is not going to be big. It's going to be microscopic. We are not a united world, and we do things in secret. And you can't. It's not just North Korea. We're doing it too. I don't.
Ethically, how open are you to the general concept of engineering children? That's always a good question.
I'm really not. I'm not. I wouldn't say that I'm a particularly religious person. And there's always that thing about religion, but I do think that mankind can overstep its bounds. And some people will say playing God, and some people. I just think that there are some things that we shouldn't be messing with. That we as humans tend to get in and mess with things that we don't know enough about, and then majorly screw things up. Our environment is one of them. The oceans. We've done a lot that really isn't okay, and we just go forward and we think, oh well, we can do it because we're exploring. But we're a people of community, and we have to understand that when we make these decisions, we can not only harm a community, we may annihilate the entire earth. Now, the other thing is, there's the whole designer baby debate, because now we're just one step away from being able to create that designer baby and say, not only that I want a girl or a boy, but this is exactly what I want them to look like, and I want them to look this way or have these attributes because I consider these attributes to be superior to other attributes. Mm-hmm. And the problem with that is that's not right. We as human beings, we tend to classify everything and think that some things are better than others, and they're just not.
Mm-hmm. There are tons of people who, if they could control every facet of their child's development, I don't want to have this, I don't want to have that, just to give him a leg up in the world based on whatever that bias is. But, there are some practical applications, but the question is who's going to draw the line in the sand. Like, if you had a child and the doctor told you that unless we do this, he is 100% guaranteed to have this incurable illness. But if you say yes, we can get rid of that. I'm more open to that. But the question is, who's going to draw that line?
Yeah, who's going to draw that line? And I will tell you that as the mother of a special needs child, mm-hmm. There are things that we know and understand because of disease, because of anomalies, because of handicaps. I'm not sure they're not purposeful. People will say, okay, well, God made a mistake, or a mistake was made, or this person isn't right. And I'm not really convinced of that. There are things that people who are different can do that we can't do. There are things that we teach us, and just even understanding the human condition is important. And I just don't think that we have the big picture. And I think that there's some cases where you just need to let nature happen. And if you could do it in isolation and it wouldn't annihilate the world, I'd be okay with that. But my concern is that that's a distinct possibility. Mm-hmm. And it's scary to me. I don't know. I think, and there's this thing about race, because a lot of times people, when I was younger, people would say, oh, it's going to be scary and terrifying because if people of different races mix, it's just going to be like all one color, and we'll all be.
Have you ever seen that they ran a simulation, and they showed they gave a rough estimate of what everyone is probably going to look like as we get closer and closer to the average. And it was like 200, 300 years out, and it was interesting. Like,
I'd love to see that, because my response to that, even as a child, is that a problem? I mean, if that's where we're going.
No, they don't say it's a problem. They just show, here's what it's going to turn into.
Let me tell you, in the 70s they did. They were like, this is a problem, and this is horrendous.
I'm sure culturally, but these scientists were just like, this is going to happen at this rate. Like, this is fine, but here's, just so you know, like, here's what we're all going to look like.
And we've changed a lot in the way that we look already. Mm-hmm. And
we're also going to be really tall. That's the other thing.
I wonder why.
Well, it's got to do a lot with our foods, and we put more and more hormone. That's one of the reasons we're getting taller as a species overall. But some of it is just.
Oh yeah, so I don't think that'll continue. My personal belief is that eating meat with hormones, just eating meat in general isn't sustainable.
Well, it's not just meat; it's everything we eat.
Yeah, so that's a problem. Then it could happen.
It's every single thing we eat. Originally, what was that food documentary? They were talking about how originally, there are like thousands of different types of corn, thousands of different species. The seed manufacturers only make 3 of them, and they've genetically engineered them so that they don't drop seeds, so that the farmers every year have to come back and get more seeds from them. And it's like, there's no really organic section in any grocery store, and it's horrifying.
Yeah, we've been changing things all along, and
but we are getting taller. Some of it is our natural just evolution, is we're picking the genes that are taller from both of our parents, and we're just slowly getting. But a lot of it is hormones. So they were also saying that our average height is just going to get taller. So my friend
it'll be interesting.
He was like, so they're going to have to raise the hoop in the NBA eventually.
Yeah, well, they already should have, in my opinion, because already it's not.
You got point guards that can dunk now.
Yeah, it's not can you get the ball in the basket. It's what you look like doing it. That should have been changed a long time ago. I will say that this is taking me back to my college days, and it was either an essay, I guess it was an essay, and it was called On Being the Right Size. We can only get so big. And the reason is, he talks about these giants and how it couldn't have worked because doing the math, your own weight would have broken your bone. Our bone is only at a certain strength. He was talking about angels and how they could not have existed because in order for the wing to be able to lift the body weight of a human, the pectoral muscle would have had to have protruded 4 feet. It was just really just looking at the science of on being the right size. So I would argue that we can only get so tall.
And there's another part. The bigger point is the oxygen level. Every biological thing on the planet is designed in such a way where we're no more than 2 or 3 cells away from oxygen. That's why we have so many capillaries. No cell can be more than about 2 or 3 cells away from an oxygen supply. So when you get to the size of a dinosaur, which back then there was way more oxygen in the air so they could get away with it, when you get to that big size, efficiency-wise, you can't provide your body with the oxygen to actually exist. So when these movies come out, like The Mist, and they have these giant creatures, there's always a scientist on Twitter, it's like, that thing could not exist in our atmosphere. That thing would drop dead 10 minutes into the movie.
Right. So, talking about oxygen, we used to believe that in order to have life, you had to have oxygen. And so when we were searching the planets, we were searching for oxygen. And on our own planet, we have found that there are life forms who don't survive on oxygen. I think it's ammonia. Is it ammonia? There's something else that they survive on. And we thought that was impossible.
Yeah, the working theory, because we've been trying to define what life is since we've been around, and the working theory at that point was that, because science is just this non-ending beta testing phase of, okay, it has to have oxygen. That's one of the criteria. And then we're like, well, wait a second, that doesn't. So let's go back to the drawing board.
Which we discovered because it was in the depths of the ocean, and I remember seeing the video, and these things produced this stuff, and it was just amazing. On Mars, there was something about we need to go look at that. There was something about there is evidence of existence of life or the ability to produce life on Mars.
Yeah.
And it's not oxygen. It's based on whatever this other thing is. So if you listen to the ancient alien theorists, we were there. We are the Martians. We came here. So that's one theory.
I love those shows.
I do too. I mean, I don't really believe it, but I want to.
Well, it's like the video game thing, like the Assassin's Creed thing I was mentioning earlier. Yeah. That's a lore. It's not true. It's fiction. But it does paint an interesting story based on real events where it's not real, but you enjoy the story of it.
I don't know that it's not real. Like, some of the things are compelling, and some of them you go, no, that doesn't work. And so I don't really know, but I love some of the ideas. I just want there to be, again, Trekkie.
Yeah.
I want there to be that.
It's like hoax theories. Like, the reason people like hoax theories, even the ones who don't just totally believe in them, is it's always a good story. Like, what's more interesting? Like, what's really more interesting? We landed on the moon, or we faked a moon landing to bankrupt another country.
Yeah.
To me, both of those are equally interesting.
Yeah, we landed on the moon. I don't know.
It's a great and even if you don't I know we landed on the moon, but it's an interesting story from binge watching hoax. Right. So Ancient Aliens, they'll always have these things. Is, could this be a statue of a guy in an ancient Aztecian throne, or is it proof that a human had a spaceship? Is that a rock he's stepping on, or is that a rocket ship pedal?
Right.
It's so great.
I just want it to be true, but I know that it might not be. I mean, I really do believe that we are not the only planet that has life, and even that has sentient life. Professor Sagan, Carl Sagan, who was a professor where I went to school, you know, he did it mathematically, and just to think that there's not other life mathematically is ridiculous. Or
my favorite philosophy, the philosophy of probably. I mean, is there life out there? Probably. But the question is, what do you do about it? You know, you just sort of can exist. Like, there's no sense in worrying, like, are we alone? Like, are there people out there? There are probably things out there. Mm-hmm. Carry on.
Carry on. Right. And then there are these two theories of, they're probably evil, or they're probably
could be
not evil. And both of those depend on your biases. I mean, I think that they are likely not evil, but could they damage us? Absolutely.
Stephen Hawking is he was one of the funniest people, other than being like one of the most brilliant minds. Just go, do you believe there's life out there? He just goes, man, I hope not. Because if they get to us first, that means that they are really advanced, and that never ends well for the indigenous people.
And it's not, right, it's not even that it's intentional necessarily, but again, that's still an earthly bias that he's working with. I mean, maybe we will be the 1,000th, colony that they have discovered, and they know exactly how to do it. Again,
it's like, you know what?
I'm going with the Star Trek model.
It's like, when in doubt,
revert to Star Trek.
That's a good default.
I hope you enjoyed this edition of Maurer Glass Podcast. You can get all episodes of Maurer Glass Podcast at maurerglass.com or on iTunes. And if you are on iTunes, we would appreciate you giving us a good review. It makes a huge difference. Bye for now.